Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Strategic and Technical Planning, Monday, 31st of March 2025. For the benefit of the public attending today or watching on the live stream, I'm Councillor Sari House, Chair of this committee, and my Vice Chair is Councillor Dave Bolwell. The meeting is being live streamed and will be available to view on the Council website after the meeting. And by attending this meeting, you consent to being filmed. Can I remind everyone that when you are speaking, please speak directly into the microphone so that you can be clearly heard and seen. The Planning Committee is not a public meeting, but a meeting to which the public is invited. All attendees must comply with the ruling of the Chair. They must not interrupt the meeting or cause undue disturbance. To support this, please switch off your mobile phones or silent mode for the duration of the meeting. And those using Teams, please ensure microphones are on mute and your device volume is set to 0 to maintain audio quality. Only those who have registered to speak in accordance with the speaking protocol will be invited to address the committee for a maximum of 3 minutes. No materials to be circulated to members of the committee. We have 2 applications to determine today, and the case officer will be invited to present the report and recommendations. Next, I will invite members of the public who have registered to speak to address the committee in the following order: public against, public support, applicant agent, town parish council, and ward members. Each have 3 minutes. Following speaking, the planning officers will have the opportunity to address any salient points they wish to clarify, and committee members will be given the opportunity to ask questions of the planning officer before moving on to their debate. When we go into councillor questions and debate, for the benefit of the public watching, can the members state their name and ward? I will try and give you a heads up as well when addressing the meeting. So, do we have any apologies today?
We've received apologies for absence from councillors Tony Coombs.
Thank you very much. I hope Tony feels better soon. Whilst considering absences, we're joined by 2 council members who were not at the previous meeting. Normally, that would mean we would have to rerun the entire application again. However, both have confirmed in writing that they have watched the video of the last meeting, and so they are able to take part in the meeting. Officers involved in today's meeting are Phil Crowther, our Senior Lawyer Regulatory, Megan Rochester, Senior Democratic Service, Anthony Nash, Senior Democratic Service Officer. Members attending are myself, Councillor Sari House, Councillor Dave Bolwell, Belinda Borden, Richard Crabb, Spencer Flower, Craig Monks, David Northam, Belinda Rideout, Pete Roper, David Taylor, and David Cook. So, Matthew, we'll look at the minutes at the end of members. Have members had the opportunity to look at the minutes? Are we content with those? I'll sign them at the end of the meeting. Okay. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Public, do you wish to make any representations at the head of the meeting, or do you wish to wait for your item to come up and then speak afterwards? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Excellent. So, agenda item 5, full 2024-04447, land north of Ewelees, Spinney, Chickerell. This is to be presented by Matthew Pochin-Hawkes. Matthew, would you like to introduce yourself and those supporting you today?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My name is Matthew Pochin-Hawkes, a lead project officer. I'm joined by Anne Collins, development manager, area manager, and Mike Garrity, corporate director of planning.
Thank you very much. And would you like to start your presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is an application for a battery energy storage system, a BESS. The application is being re-reported to the Strategic Plan Committee after it was deferred at the January committee meeting. And the application was deferred to enable officers to liaise with the applicant to seek further clarification and/or an amendment regarding an additional access point. And before I get into the presentation proper, I'll just run through the update sheet, and a short note on that. The update sheet reference number should have been 04447. It's 0447. That's a further update on there. But the update sheet covers late objections and those other items on screen. So just taking them in turn, we've got the National Flood Risk Assessment. That, as set out in the report, is new data from the Environment Agency across the whole of England, which updates flood zones for the country, and that includes flood zones 1, 2, 3, and surface water details. So we reviewed that for the site. The site still falls within flood zone 1. There is still that part of one of the accesses which is in a surface water elevated flood risk zone, and that is consistent with the original assessment and doesn't change the conclusions in the report. Secondly, we have had late comments from Southern Gas Networks. They've provided a late comment about AC-DC interference on a nearby gas pipeline, which I can come on to and show. Through discussions with SGN, they have no objection subject to conditions, and that condition is set out in the update sheet in full. And just in summary, it's to protect the gas pipeline from interference, and SGN have advised it's a relatively new matter for BESS developments, but it also comes into play on solar farms and substation developments as well. So that's a new condition there. And then since the report was published, we've had further correspondence with members as well. It's been quite detailed. All of those comments are set out on the planning register for transparency, and they are from some of the parties that are speaking here this morning: Kelsa, John Patton, Dr. Jay Fannin, and the Dr. Jay White and Neil Hudson. They are late comments which have come in after the update sheet. Dr. Jay White is objecting on contamination plume grounds in terms of the smoke impact, and it's considered that the comments are addressed in the update sheet and reports. And the late comments from Neil Hudson, the chair of planning at Chickerell Town Council, it's considered those comments are also addressed within the reports as well. And we've also had correspondence from the applicant, which is all again published on the council's planning register for transparency. So coming onto the presentation, I'm just, because this is an update from the January committee, I'm just going to do a kind of recap on the site, the proposals, before getting into mainly the access reasons for deferral of this item. And this site includes the main access road from Cold Harbour, which leads to 2 access roads, which lead to the site of the proposed battery energy storage system here. And these access roads serve adjacent parcels of land and plots which are in mainly agricultural use there, and I'll come on to the Statira development in a moment. The access road is about 550 metres from the site of the BESS, and this branching point here is about 350 metres away, and that's also the same distance as the closest residential property, 350 metres here east at Grafton Avenue, and the site is currently used for horse grazing. So it's worth noting the nearby developments to the site. So the 400 megawatt BESS granted in January, the Stratera development, is just outlined here in red on the slide. That's to the west of the site, and to the north, those two northern fields would be used for recreation, and the BESS containers themselves would be on these two fields here. What is also shown on this plan for context is the live application to the east of Chickrill. This is an application, a residential-led mixed-use application for redevelopment of this site. It's currently live, hasn't been undecided, and that's about 400 metres from the site of the proposed BESS here. So coming on to the proposed BESS site, this is the proposed site plan. The application is for a 50 megawatt battery energy storage system. It consists within the compound here of a level surfaced area, forming a level platform on the site, 6 quads of battery containers, totaling 24 containers. The batteries have been specified by the applicant as CATL Energex batteries. Each of those quads have transformers, and there are 2 larger transformers on the southwest corner of the site, together with a customer substation on the southeast corner of the site. All of this is enclosed within a 4-metre high acoustic fence. Outside of the compound are 5 water tanks here along the access road. Access to the BESS compound will be provided by the north through this northern access, or the east through this eastern access. The remainder of the site is landscaped. And just to point out here, the SGN pipeline. So this is the SGN pipeline here. And what you see in hashed is their easement, and that's a zone which they have control over. And just to point out what is proposed within that, in the application site, all that's proposed is wildflower seeding, where that easement just clips the northwest corner of the site there. And the development would be time limited for a period of 40 years, after which time the site would be decommissioned. So the application was deferred at the January committee meeting so that officers could give further consideration of the site access from Cold Harbour. And in summary, it was felt that a single access point from the main road wouldn't be suitable because of fire risks of the development, cumulative impacts with the Stratera development, and potential for the access to be blocked in the event of terrorism. Since the January meeting, officers have asked the applicant to consider whether they can form a second access from Cold Harbour, and if not, explain why the proposal is considered to be acceptable. And as set out in the committee report, the applicant has submitted a response document from further to the January committee, a smoke plume analysis report, and a verification and compliance report. We have undertaken a kind of targeted consultation on that information. We've consulted the Fire and Rescue Service, the police, highways, Chickrill Town Council, and ward councillors. And we've also had a further round of public consultation as well, where we've had comments received and captured in the report. So, from the applicant's position, it's not possible for them to form a secondary access from Cold Harbour, and that's due to the kind of site constraints and the land ownership here. This falls within the Stratera development, as does this. This is really the only access in from the north, and access can't be formed from the east either. So they've sought to justify the approach. And going back to what the National Fire Chief Council guidance says, what it says about access, and this is the document that we as planners are asked to have regard to, and the Fire and Rescue Service are asked to have regard to when they're giving comments to the local planning authority. And what it says about the 2 accesses is that development should have at least 2 separate access points to the site to account for opposite wind direction / conditions. And the guidance isn't specific about whether a site is defined as what we know in planning terms as the red line taking access all the way up to the road, or whether it's the site of a BESS compound itself. But anyway, we have the comments from the Fire and Rescue Service, and on the 6th of February, they gave comments to reiterate that the purpose of alternative access to a BES site is to provide tactical options for fire crews to approach a BES site from upwind or reach a place of relevant safety away from smoke or fumes as far as reasonably possible. And that they say in those comments that they do recognise that some exposure to smoke may occur and that appliances, fire engines, may need to transit through that smoke in order to reach cleaner air locations. So the reasons for that second access within the NFCC guidance is about tactical firefighting and to try and minimise going through smoke. And what we have on screen now, I've just kind of crudely annotated the distances here, just as the crow flies, as you know, that's relevant for the smoke. But the access from Cold Harbour is 550 metres away to the north of the BES compound, and around the branching point here where engines could go either east or south is around 350 metres away. And you know, that's a significant distance there. And based on the applicant's plume study, which they've submitted since the committee, this branching point is considered to be sufficient distance to ensure that the Fire and Rescue Service could have tactical firefighting options to approach the site from either direction, depending on the wind conditions. This is an extract from the plume analysis, and this is what they've submitted to consider key scenarios. And those scenarios are a single cabinet fire. A BES unit is made up, these particular BES units are made up of 4 cabinets. So they've modelled a single cabinet fire. And then they have also measured a full BES fire, which involves all 4 cabinets. And you know, these BES units aren't, they have a number of safety measures to minimise the risk of that happening, but the risk of fire cannot be eliminated, and I'll come on to some of those measures. So they've modelled that, and it's been produced by a principal scientific advisor for West Midlands Fire Service. They're stated to have hazardous materials special experience for 28 years in advising on chemical classification, monitoring and modelling dispersal. And this is the extract from the full BES fire, and that was considered as a reasonable worst case, in that a fire, the safety measures fail and a fire spreads between the 4 cabinets that make up a BES. And just to note, that's consistent with the Statera development, which also modelled a single BES fire. And what the plume study sets out is it analyses acute exposure guideline levels of hydrogen fluoride. Hydrogen fluoride because it's stated to have the greatest potential for harm out of the potential chemicals to be released from a BES fire. And acute guideline levels, they're levels which are used by emergency planners and responders dealing with chemical dispersal within the air to look at the impacts. And the levels go from levels 3 to 1, with level 3 being the most toxic. In level 1, the exposure is reversible. In level 2, it can result in permanent impairment, and that's where the Fire and Rescue Service are really concerned about in terms of impact. So what you can see on here on this slide is in yellow is the AEG acute exposure guideline level 1, and that extends to a certain distance here, and you have the acute exposure guideline level 2 here, which is in orange. That is very close to the source of the fire in the modelling, and that extends up to 32 metres for an exposure guideline of 4 hours. And if there were to be a fire here, it would be the fire service would manage and coordinate any exclusion zones around a fire, and any guidance to local residents with the Local Resilience Forum. But as you can see on this, it is modelled quite tightly to the site, and what it shows is that the branching point where the road comes in from Cold Harbour, that's 350 metres away. That's considered to be sufficient distance to allow firefighters to choose either access the site and that they would be able to transit through any smoke to reach the site and deal with the fire. The applicant has also set out in the plume study comparisons with a car fire and a fire at a garage, and those impacts are generally comparable, worse than a single cabinet fire or full BESS fire, and typically those developments are much closer to residential developments. The Fire and Rescue Service, they had no objection in their original comments back in September. They considered that the introduction of a secondary access, compared to the application that was refused last March, had been created to satisfy the NFCC guidance in terms of secondary access. And their comments from February confirm that the access tracks have been assessed as adequate, as they provide routes to the site from the north or from the southwest, and via 2 gates to the BES compound on the east and north here. So the Fire and Rescue Service had no objection to the access. And further to the access arrangements, they are also similar to other BES applications that have been considered by the council in the major BES applications in the last 12 months. The Strategia development uses the same access, and there's 2 other applications, a 3-legged cross and Litchett Minster as well, which have a similar access arrangement. And whilst every application must be determined on its own merits, given the material considerations haven't changed, access arrangements should be considered consistently. And as out in the report, officers are satisfied that has been demonstrated in this case. And just tracking back on that, in terms of the other matters in the report, highways were consulted, and the concern came up about the cumulative impact with the Strategia development, and they have no objection, and they advised there wouldn't be a highway safety issue or severe traffic impacts if these 2 developments were to come forward at the same time. They're not expected to come forward at the same time, but in the worst case that they have no objection. And Dorset Police, they were also consulted about the terrorism aspects that were raised at the January committee meeting. They say that they're not aware of any terrorist threat to BES developments, and they make a series of recommendations for physical security measures, including fencing, gates, CCTV, and alarms. And given Dorset Police isn't aware of any specific threats, a planning condition isn't considered necessary. However, you'll see in the update sheet that we have got an informative there to make the applicant, ultimate developer, aware of what measures have been recommended by the police, and a number of those measures are required anyway, in terms of the fence for noise reasons needing to be erected before the development comes into use. And we've also had the Heathrow being knocked out because of the substation fire there, and I think just an observation on that is that this site is next to a substation, which would seem to be a higher priority target if we were talking about terrorism, given the potential to knock out electricity to a much kind of large area. So whilst the application was deferred on access grounds at the January committee meeting, a number of the objections raised concerns about health and safety, particularly in light of the BES fires at Moss Landing, California, and East Tilbury, Essex. So it's worth just recapping on the mitigative and preventative measures that are proposed. And I presented this in the January meeting, but I'm just going to talk through it again. So these battery units, they have a number of measures in there which are designed to prevent a thermal runaway from occurring. And they include detectors. Each BES unit would have its own detectors, which would detect for signs of a fire. Each battery unit would have a battery management system, which would give information about energy capacity, thermal status, and detection to allow the system to be monitored and controlled. There would be thermal management systems to keep BES containers cool and try to prevent temperatures getting to a thermal runaway condition. And as an added layer of protection, where thermal runaway cannot be mitigated, there are also measures to reduce the potential for fire spread and gas explosion. So for the measures to prevent fire spread, there is a fire detection system within the battery units. There's a StatX suppression system, which is condensed aerosol that's within those BESS units. There are separation distances, as set out in the reports. They are arranged in the batteries are arranged in quads, in line with manufacturer guidance, which are then separated by firewalls. Those quads are 5.9 meters from each other, and you have the barriers also go between the battery units, but also then between the transformers nearby as well, to prevent that heat level. The site also has water tanks to the north of the site, in line with guidance and covering the worst case in terms of rainfall. And there are emergency service information points with details of how the site would be, how the site should be approached, and that is proposed to be secured by condition. And then you have the access and the passing places. So there's the access to the north of the compound, the access to the east of the compound, and the applicant has shown that there are a number of areas where fire appliances could pass each other on those routes to the site. In terms of flammable gas buildup, each container has gas detectors and a ventilation system to prevent gas buildup and the explosion risk, and they're designed to be triggered and activated automatically. In addition, there would be fencing, a 4-meter acoustic fence around the site, and thermal imaging cameras around the perimeter at the corner points and then the middle of the fence lines as well. And as set out in the committee report, the surroundings of the BESS containers would be impermeable to enable any contaminated fire water to be retained on site within the tank, as agreed with the Environment Agency, and there are conditions around that. And then the design and safety measures are, they're quite different to some of the BESS fire that we've seen recently at Moss Landings. That came into operation very early, and it used a different type of battery chemistry. Here is proposed LFP, lithium iron phosphate battery, versus a kind of nickel magnesium cobalt, which has a lower thermal runaway temperature. And these are just to kind of visualize that. These are some of the photos of the Moss Landing BESS, and it was I think operational in 2020, but it's a BESS in building development, something that we haven't got that before us. It's what we see generally are kind of outdoor BESS developments, and it's fairly unique in that the BESS was in a converted building, not a purpose-built building here, and there were a number of BESS containers within there, and it became operational before a lot of modern guidance came out. It's in America, so it's NFPA 855, whereas we've got NFCC guidance here, and that was a significant fire within a building of the first phase of the development. And then the East Tilbury BESS fire, which is captured in some of the public comments and also in the report as well. This is more typical of what you see of a BESS development in terms of outdoor containers which have their own systems and mitigative measures, and that helps to reduce the spread. And here, there was a fire during the construction of this development, and according to the reports from the Fire and Rescue Service, it was dealt with promptly and returned back to the construction team within 24 hours. And that kind of demonstrates how a good emergency response in that situation. So, in terms of the recommendation, we've looked carefully at the matters were raised at the January committee and consider that the applicant has demonstrated the access arrangements to be suitable. The Fire and Rescue Service doesn't object. And whilst there have been extensive objections, it's also important not to lose sight of the benefits of this development as well as captured in the January committee report. There are significant benefits of the proposal, which are considered to significantly outweigh the limited harm of the development in terms of landscape and visual effect and loss of agricultural land. The development would serve the electricity needs of approximately 19,500 households, it would help to support tackling climate change, decarbonising the electricity grid, working towards net zero and helping to deliver energy security. And in accordance with the NPPF, those benefits are afforded significant weight. So the recommendation here is to grant planning permission subject to conditions, and those conditions are outlined in the update sheet. I'm just going to, happy to take any questions on those conditions, but I'm just going to touch on the ones that have been adjusted. And that's condition number 8 here, the battery safety management plan. That's been updated to refer to the specific batteries, require the detailed battery safety management plan prior to commencement, not installation, so that just brings it forward a bit, and also be explicit about the CCTV provision as well being provided. And then the other update is the gas pipeline condition here, and that's the condition wording that's been agreed with SGN prior to energisation of the development. And there is also that informative that I mentioned on the police security measures for the site. So thank you. That concludes my presentation, Chair.
Thank you very much. So before we go to any technical questions from the committee, we welcome our members of the public who wish to make representations today. And we're going to start with Dr. John Fannon. John, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking.
Oh, okay, thank you. Good morning, Chair and members. And the documents submitted by the applicant since January show that the energy capacity of the containers in this BESS to be 42% greater than the ones in the Statera containers. So in the case of a BESS fire, this would give proportionately greater volumes of smoke and toxic gases. A fire in a single BESS container can burn for over 3 days, well beyond the capacity of a 4-hour firewall to protect the other 3 on the plinth. Evidence from a BESS fire recorded in Beijing recorded a temperature of 1765 degrees Celsius, well above the melting point of steel. The overpressure recorded in that explosion was 10 pounds per square inch. An overpressure of just 3 pounds per square inch will shatter a concrete wall. This was a lithium ferrous phosphate battery, lithium iron phosphate cells. A fire in a single container would therefore spread to the other 3, no matter what steps the firefighters took. An explosion would blow the doors off and damage the transformers as well. The NFPA standard requires a real-life test to demonstrate that a fire in one container will not propagate to those nearby. There is no evidence that this test has been done. The applicant offers computer calculations to demonstrate that a smoke plume emitted from a burning container will not affect the local area. The outcome following the BESS fire at Moss Landing and the effect on the local community has shown to the world just how dangerous these BESS can be. The applicant's computer calculations are therefore dangerously optimistic. Reliance on computer models and ignoring real-life evidence is tantamount to astrology or witchcraft. Communities in the United States are becoming increasingly concerned at the imposition of these batteries where no regard is placed paid for safety or residential property values. The mayor of Escondido City, where the council had voted 4-1 against BESS in local areas, said recently, BESS do not bring any economic benefits in the form of jobs or local tax revenues. Indeed, instead, they may burden the city with health and safety issues, long-term deprivation of static land, and negative impact on residential land values. A fire that lasts for 24 or 48 hours will also put a drain on first responders. Members, by your decision last July, you've already endangered our area by approving Statera's 2,400 megawatt-hour BESS.
Dr. Fannon, thank you very much. That's 3 minutes. So we now move to the next speaker. Kay Kelsall, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Whilst initially I was reassured to see that the applicants had commissioned a plume study, in response to concerns raised in January, my heart sank when I read what is effectively a biased exercise in smoke and mirrors. Nielsen et al., 2024 in the Energy Research and Social Science Journal, say that developers selectively use studies to support their claims, leveraging data not to educate the public but to fortify their own position. They also tap into political media and industry narratives, aligning themselves with broader clean energy goals to drown out legitimate local concerns. The applicant's Commission Plume study, in my view, is a good example of this. They do not share information of the limitations of the hazard modelling software they chose to employ. They used something called Area Locations of Hazardous Atmospheres, or ALOA, hazard modelling software created by the US Environment Protection Agency, which gives users the following warnings, and bear these in mind in terms of the predominant weather conditions in Chickerell. So ALOA's concentration estimates can be less accurate when any condition exists that reduces mixing in the atmosphere. For example, very low wind speeds. At less than 3 miles an hour, the pollutant cloud doesn't mix quickly with the surrounding air. The concentration of the gas in the chemical cloud may therefore remain higher than ALOA predicts, especially near the source. Very stable atmospheric conditions, which generally occur at night or in the early morning, and may be indicated by conditions such as low-lying fog, can lead to gas concentrations within a pollutant cloud remaining high, far from the source. Crucially, the ALOA model used by Greenfire actually has a warning within the plume modelling diagrams, which you've seen on the screen this morning, generated by the software. You can see these at page 14 and 16 of the report. That warning states hydrogen fluoride can react with water and or water vapour. This can affect the evaporation rate and downwind dispersion. ALOA cannot accurately predict the air hazard if this substance comes into contact with water. What happens when firefighters are busy damping down adjacent containers to prevent fire spread? What if it's raining? Lastly, ALOA does not account for the processes that affect dispersion of particulates. We're now learning in real time of the health threat posed by these dangerous and toxic heavy metal products of combustion from a BESS fire. Please don't be comforted by this flawed attempt to reassure you.
Thank you very much. And we move to our last public speaker, which is John Perrott. John, you have 3 minutes. I'll give you a heads up at 2 minutes 30.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Committee. The reasons why an earlier application on this site was refused have not been addressed by this application. 3 minutes doesn't allow me to detail this fully, but I'll do what I can. If a fire occurs in the northwestern battery container on the site, then, according to the applicant's plume study, that is assuming it's fit for purpose, a smoke plume would affect both the primary and secondary site entrances at the same time. Simply look at the diagram again that you've just seen, diagram 5 of the plume study, move the source of the fire, and you'll see this for yourselves. Not having a safe secondary access means additional risk to the first responders and a delay in firefighting. No one seems to have looked to see if a plume can cover both access points at the same time. The plume study doesn't even mention access points. It isn't enough just to have a secondary access. It has to be fit for purpose. There are no passing places on the access track that allow one fire tender to pass another. The application only shows emergency vehicles can pass cars. The track's too narrow for anything else. Again, effective firefighting would be hindered, and this earlier reason for refusal has not been addressed. Firefighting would be further hindered, according to the FRS, by the proposal to site batteries in quads. They say there is insufficient room between the containers to effectively spray cooling water. Committee previously rejected a fire water supply of 250,000 litres as being inadequate. A wise decision in the light of recent and ongoing real-life experience where it's been learnt that far more water than that is required to control a BESS fire. This application proposes to provide exactly the same amount of water. How then has this earlier reason for refusal been addressed? It hasn't. If this gave cause for prior refusal and remains the same, surely, in order to maintain continuity, committee has to refuse this application too. The pollution control methods were another reason why the earlier application was refused. Nothing has changed between that application and this. The dangers of toxic firewater polluting the ground and aquifers identified by earlier committee remain. Having a pre-commencement condition relating to pollution control is not an answer. It simply ducks the issue. The design was found by earlier committee to be flawed and dangerous. Without any change, it remains so. Committee, this application has not addressed the reasons for prior refusal, which are material considerations. I look forward to hearing your debate and your consideration of the reasons for prior refusal. I urge you to keep people safe and to refuse this.
Thank you, John. So we now move to Philip Duncan, agent.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for letting me speak to you today and provide further context and clarification in support of our application. We understand and acknowledge the public interest surrounding this proposal. However, it has become increasingly clear that a significant proportion of the information circulating in public forums and submitted in recent objections is not evidence-based, and in many cases has been drawn from unverified sources or selectively taken out of context. Much of it reflects speculation rather than a balanced or technically informed understanding of the matters at hand. As you are aware, the planning system is designed to function based on material planning considerations, guided by expert advice from statutory consultees and governed by national and local planning policy. It is with this in mind that we respectfully ask the committee to assess this application through the appropriate evidence-led lens and to distinguish between professional input and speculation. Following the previous committee hearing and in direct response to concerns raised by both members of the public, we have undertaken further consultation with Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service, the Highways Authority and the police. These were not token engagements, they were meaningful, detailed and done with the intent to address any outstanding concerns. As a result, I can confirm that none of these statutory consultees have raised objections. Each has reviewed the relevant documents of the scheme and each has confirmed that it meets their operational and safety expectations. One of the recurring concerns raised by members of the public, both during and after the previous committee, has been in relation to access and whether the use of a shared or singular access lane creates an unacceptable risk. We would like to reiterate that a single point access arrangements are common across a wide variety of developments, including business parks, energy infrastructure, sites, rural industrial schemes, and residential cul-de-sacs. The key consideration is not whether there is a second access in every case, but whether the access provided is safe, serviceable, and meets the requirements of the statutory authorities, all of which have been confirmed here. We would also like specifically to address concerns raised about toxic plume modelling. There has been some doubt cast on its source, methods or independence. Our toxic plume analysis was undertaken by Green Fire Solutions, an independent, highly qualified fire safety environmental consultant. Green Fire Solutions is not affiliated with Energy 23 and brings strong track record of professional credibility, including the role as advisor to the National Fire.
Thank you very much, Philip, for that representation. We now move to the Parish Town Council, which is Councillor Neil Hudson from Chickrell.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to allow me to speak with this. And also, just following this quote of evidence-based, I just think that this application is in the wrong place due to its proximity to housing. I know we've seen various models. I would like to point out, I've looked at this document, I've read it, I've also scanned it with AI to pick out any to allow for human error and allow to spot inaccuracies. So I spotted that the plume has got two different mentions there, two different heights. So I'm not convinced that the scientific data here is going to be accurate for you to make a good decision. The second is the wind direction, which is incorrect. If you refer it against somewhere like the Sailing Centre in Dorset, which is going to have a very accurate record of wind direction, I think that will give you a slightly different report. The other thing is fire. The fire report is based on more of a sort of personnel approach. It doesn't really look at in depth at the procedures. I mean, some, but the water as such is insufficient. The main point I need to raise here, and something that nobody's talked about, is the public evacuation costs, which is disproportional to the benefit to society. We have 4 schools. There's a police station. There's a football stadium. There's residents on both sides. And with any sort of evacuations, there's going to be disruption to public operations. If there were to be a fire, there would be a major problem with access, although that would have to use police personnel to be in control. So if you're going to start evacuating public schools, there's 4, police station, and the football stadium. All of these will take almost an immeasurable amount of public money, not just in terms of actually operation, but in terms of planning. So if you think of the school leaders that have got to go into planning the evacuations, the police personnel that have gone into planning the evacuations, it's going to take an enormous amount of public money, perhaps even to having a secondary police station. So one thing I did pick up while we were speaking is that if there's going to be a different type of battery release, the modelling's done on lithium fluoride. Thank you. If it is a phosphorus-based battery, it'd be phosphoric acid, pH 2, and that's not something to be inhaled. So thank you for listening to these points. The rest of the points I've raised with Chickerell Council, and I hope that you make the right decision.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hudson. We now move to the local ward member, Councillor Simon Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here in support of Chickerell Town Council, as you just heard from Neil there. I think what you have to do is accept that every single objection might have a solution, but the combination is what causes great consternation and upset in the community. I won't go through the detail again. You've already heard what people have said, but the considerations about the plume, where it's going to go, the different opportunities that might be presented or different risks that might be presented, the fire safety, you sort of heard some mitigation, but maybe not quite enough, maybe just about enough. The wind direction, the plume appears to be fixed, whereas the wind direction, as we have known, changes consistently in this area. And the evacuation plans and costs, as Neil's just outlined. So what I would say in summary is each and every objection appears to have some mitigation, but the collective is what's causing the community nervousness. Chickerell Town Council didn't just vote against this. They have strong views and strong objection to this. I've yet to find any single person on the many doors that many in this room will have knocked on to find anyone who's in support of this and other similar applications. So my point in the end is, can you please consider the whole, not as each individual line? Can you please consider the views and concerns of a community who haven't really had this explained to them in enough detail, in my view? My fear for us for you as councillors is that you're here not to act on behalf of our officers. You're not here to act on behalf of what the benefits might be. You're not here just to keep us out of the courts and a planning dispute, but you're here to represent the views of local people. We've got a town council, both ward members, I'm representing the other ward member as well, Councillor Taylor, and many local people, many of whom are here now to express views on behalf of their communities, all saying this is the right application, but in the wrong place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clifford. Matt, do you wish to address any of those points made by council members and members of the public?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, speakers. many of these points were covered in the update sheet. So I'll just touch on a few matters there, and I think there's a comparison there on the Statera development having more power in the batteries than what is proposed here. I'd just point out that the Statera development was less than 100 metres from residential properties. Here we've got a development which is 350 metres from the closest residential property. There are, as I mentioned, a series of measures to try and mitigate fire spread and a thermal runaway occurring, including explosion and doors being blown off the battery units. I've talked about Moss Landings in the presentation, and just to note that development is not directly comparable to what is proposed here. The modelling results, just to note that they are similar to the conclusions of the Statera development, which again was much closer and also looked at wind blowing directly towards the closest residential properties. Here, the wind is shown to blow east towards the closest residential properties on Grafton Avenue. There's a comment about what water would do to hydrogen fluoride, and from the Fire and Rescue Service, it's understood that they would, or they may, deploy water curtains to scrub the air, given that hydrogen fluoride is highly soluble, and that also covers what may happen in a rainfall event. In terms of the access, just point out again, the Fire and Rescue Service has no objection to that. The passing places, they were considered in the original report, and there are shown to be a number of passing places along the route from Cold Harbour. In terms of the amount of water that would be deployed, that may be deployed, the provision on site lines up with the NFCC guidance, and as set out in the Plume study, there would be a burn policy for these containers where they're left to consume themselves with water being used for boundary cooling. The comment about the previous reasons for refusal not being addressed, members will know the reasons for the refusal there, but just to point out they're quite extensive reasons there, with the first reason including the single access, lack of vehicle passing places, layout of the site, and lack of water supply, drenches and inlets, and that's set out in detail in the first committee report, the January committee report. I'm just looking through other points that I might just want to address. That I think, most of them are covered in the update sheet. On the evacuation costs, the cost of evacuation with any type of development is not a material planning consideration, but evacuation would be managed by the fire brigade and the local resilience forum, so Dorset Prepared, teaming up with other agencies, and they're the category 1 responders under the Civil Contingencies Act to protect the risk of life in the event of emergency. And we in this planning application, we can't be guided by the cost of any evacuation of a fire happening. And just on the final speaker, their officers have looked at this application very carefully in the January committee report and this committee report. We have consulted those parties that we feel need to be consulted, and I hope the officers' reports provide sufficient detail for an informed decision there. So I think that concludes my responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor David Taylor would like to ask a technical question. So we're going to move into a period of technical questions before we move into debate. So David, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Taylor, Champston Mary Ward, member of this committee and panel today. Technical questions I'd like to ask, please, is the wall that you've asked to build around the units is 4 metres high. What's it made of? And how does it blend into the countryside? That would be the first thing I would ask, because 4 metres is pretty high for a soundproofing wall. You've also mentioned about the ventilators extracting the gas if there was a release. I don't see that being put into your connotation of the plume. So therefore, where is the gas? Because it will be forced out of the area into the sky, and where would it end up? The thing with just about the access, yes, I totally understand that, and Mr. Savage, I would probably come back to you on that one, is the fact is that, is it passable in case a vehicle breaks down not in the passing bay? Now, that's the key question for me, because that means the access would not be able to get to put out the fire. And finally, and I did raise this before, and I have seen no mention at all, the water runoff with all the chemicals and all the things in it, where does it go? Because I can't see now where it is. Thank you. That's 4 questions. I might come back.
Matt, are you okay with those?
Yeah, thank you. And okay, I'll just try and take those questions in turn, but obviously come back to us on any of those. So the first question was about the acoustic fence, how it would blend in to the surroundings and what materials is it made out of. The fence is required by the noise impact assessment. And what the noise impact assessment says is that it could be constructed of concrete, masonry, block, brick, close-boarded timber fence, or specialist acoustic barrier design. So there's a number of materials there and finishes, and the details are required in the conditions. The second question is about how would it blend into Yeah. So in terms of it blending in, it's concluded in the January report there would be some adverse landscape and visual impact of this. This isn't going to be entirely blended in with the surroundings. But what the site location is such that on the west side you've got quite a high hedgerow, quite good natural screening, and then also similar to the north of the site over the access road, there is a good level of screening there as well. Outside of the site, on the eastern boundary and on the south, you've got the public right-of-way there, so you would see it as you come down, but there is planting there in a woodland block planting, which initially would be low level, but as it matures, the landscape impact would lessen. So the conclusion in the January committee report is that the landscape impacts are kind of limited and localized. Yes, there would be some adverse visual impact, but it's at a low level and it's considered to be mitigated by the proposals. The second question there was about the gas and where it would end up. That's I haven't got the answer to that. I suppose it's dependent on the wind conditions, and it's not something that we've considered further. What happens if a car breaks down on the access road or a vehicle? I would say that I think that will be a matter for the Fire and Rescue Service to deal with. They, as well as dealing with fires, they deal with car breakdowns and everything else like that. I'd expect that they'd know what to do in that scenario, and they'd be trained and prepared for that kind of situation. And depending where the breakdown happened, there would also be that secondary access which they could reach the BES compound on. The question about the water and where it would go, there's no changes since the previous committee. There is still that tank, that underground tank. The drainage strategy remains the same. I think the plan that I showed was just the kind of overview plan. It didn't show anything underground, but there's no change on that. Thank you.
Entry.
The reason I'm asking these questions, Councillor David Taylor here, Chancellor St Mary, is the fact that the detail of the report, the accuracy of the report needs to be finite. As we said, we presented today with the notes that's come through. On page 5 of your documents, you've got at the very top of it 350 distance. There is no metre, no mile, no inch, no foot. So therefore, the detail is where we're scrutinising today. I know you've said it in your report that it's 350 on the maps, but it's not in the report itself. It's just 350. So therefore, this is where we need to look at detail to make sure we're actually being given all the facts and understand completely what's going on here. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Matt, can you confirm that's 350 metres as per the slide? Councillor Crabb.
It's gone red.
Hey.
I take my opportunity. Okay. I am Councillor Richard Crabb, representing Sherborne West Ward. I've got a couple of questions. One concerns maintenance periods of equipment. I did see that some kit has to be replaced every 10 years, and I'd like to see a condition in the planning to show that maintenance is carried out as per the period recommended by manufacturers of kit, whether it's Statex or whatever it might be. That's the first question. The second question is, what other developments are there where there's a similar proximity of a BESS development with housing? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, in terms of the maintenance periods, you know, that would be for the site operator, and there's conditions on the actual equipment, and yeah, I don't think it's got that maintenance regime on the condition. In terms of the similar distances from this development and others, I'm aware of what we got in Dorset. Haven't got detailed understanding of other ones, but in the Strateria development, that was less than 100 metres there from the new development to the east of Chickerell that's coming forward, and about 100 metres from Cold Harbour. In the last 12 months, we've also had application at Three-Legged Cross, which was about 85 metres from the closest residential property, and Litchett Minster, which was about 120 to 130 metres. So all three of those developments are much closer to the nearest residential property than the application we're talking about now. Here, the closest property is 350 metres away.
Any other technical questions? Yes, Councillor Borden.
Belinda Rideout, Gillingham Ward. It's confusing. Matthew, I just wanted some clarification, really. I know the access road is quite contentious. It's the main concern for a lot of people. But I was just referring to the Dorset Police. They've come up with some recommendations. One is CCTV. And I know if this went ahead, this would be part of an informative. But it does mention there about, on page 22, the CCTV must have a recording, include live voice warnings from the monitoring centre and query what other CCTV areas it could cover, i.e. immediate exterior boundary and access road. And I think this is actually quite important to have that access road, which has got most concerns, covered by CCTV. But in your in the informative later on, it's page 42, you don't actually mention immediate exterior boundary and access road. Is there a reason for omitting those words? Because I actually, as I said, I think that's important. And secondly, about the access road, who is responsible for maintaining it? I take it there will be some sort of signage out on the highway, keep clear, that sort of thing, and ongoing maintenance. And is it robust enough to actually take fire rescue service vehicles? I know they're very heavy, and I've seen one bogged in. So that continual maintenance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions there. Yeah, the access road, that's a summary there of the security measures at informative 9. And yeah, on CCTV, it's, consideration should be given to including live voice warnings and the extent of CCTV coverage to other areas of the site. I suppose it's not, it's not explicit to say including access road, but the access road does fall within the site. So, ask the applicant to consider it as part of that. If members felt that clarity was needed there, we could amend that informative to just say including access road on that first sentence. The maintenance of the access road, I'm not sure exactly how that access would be maintained, but would imagine it would be between all of those owners that are reliant on that access in terms of paying and maintaining that access into the site. The Fire and Rescue Service haven't had raised any concerns about the robustness of that access into the site. So there's no objection from them about that robustness. Thank you.
Chair, I'm just wondering if ongoing maintenance should be part of a condition or something.
So just for clarification, this applicant doesn't own the access road. So it would be difficult to impose something on land that they don't own. With regards to the CCTV covering the access road, would you be content for that wording to be amended to include that? Would that help?
Yes, I would, Chairman. Thank you.
So if I can ask the officer if we can do that. Would you like to see that wording before we determine it? You're happy to delegate that? Thank you. Are all members happy for that aspect to be delegated to the officer? Thank you. Councillor Took.
Right, that's working. There you are.
There we go. My name's David Took, Cranbourne and Old Holt. I just want to confirm on the access road, we have an approved site just to the northeast. Sorry, northwest. No, northeast. Yeah. Northeastish. That uses the same entrance off Cold Harbour. And we sat in this committee and worried about that single access because originally that had only one track around it. And they inserted a second track around it going the other way. So still from the same point off Cold Harbour, but then splitting the track so that vehicles could move around it in different ways. And we've got the same process here, is that correct? So we've got the same single track access that then splits into two and allows access from different directions into the site itself. So is that the same principle as the one that we approved just a few weeks ago, really, in this chamber?
It's a slightly different situation. As part of the Strategia development, they proposed that access road which went around the site, and it went they had kind of 4 BES compounds as part of that, and it went around the kind of perimeter of the kind of north and west side of it to give a kind of circulatory route around the whole development. So here, the access falls outside of the actual BES compound, but it's similar. There isn't that circulatory route around the outside, and that's because this development is much smaller. You've got 24 battery units here rather than 600, and what we're showing in terms of the access to the site, that's considered to be suitable without a need to go around the kind of external part of the perimeter of the site.
Do you have a supplementary?
So, yeah, there's an access coming in from the top, and then they can move around and come in from the west via a track that's going to be put in, so to give multi-direction access, that's right?
Yes, if it helps, I can show the Stratera site layout, and I can bring this one up. Just bear with me a moment. I hope I can get back into the presentation. Okay. If I just try and find the slide here. Yeah, so here you've got the kind of multi-directional way into the site, whereas Stratera went around the entirety of their BES compound. This comes in to the east and north, and that's what you have in terms of the close-up. So you've got the northern entrance here and the eastern entrance here.
And then if you look at the original, or the earlier approval, the routes into that come in and then go around it when they go around it completely. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor David Taylor, Charminster, St Mary's.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, sorry, one question I did forget, which I want to come back in on, if that's okay. Charminster, St Mary, by the way, on that one there. Your statement regarding the production of electricity for the benefit of the community. Now, I would like some clarification on this because I'm trying to find the paragraph in the wording there. I hope you can understand. It says where you're going to give a certain amount of energy to the community. You stated as in, just your statement stated you were giving to 250 houses, was it? Something like that? Homes? Okay. Because the statement doesn't say that. It says it goes to the grid. Right, and that's what I want to clarify because it's got a differentiating statement there saying it's a benefit to the community, but it's actually going to the grid. So therefore, what is it actually giving to the community instead of just being a substation? Thank you.
So the energy that would go back to the grid, that isn't ring fence for the local community. It can go anywhere. I think the figures in the January report were purely for kind of illustrative purposes to kind of picture how much energy this could produce in terms of serving local homes. So I've used the data, ONS data for average energy usage in Dorset, and that pulls out a figure for I think 11,500 homes. But of course, yes, this substation sits in the centre of Dorset. We've also got Mannington. That's all we've got in Dorset at this level. So that electricity could go anywhere. And in the committee report, I'm talking about it in kind of general planning benefit terms, a wider community benefit. And of course, that kind of tallies with the renewable energy net zero benefits as well. So it's an observational fact. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other technical questions? Councillor Spencer Flower Verwood.
Verwood Ward. I'm coming back to the access route. Does the applicant intend to get an easement if it's not in his ownership? And will there be a legal agreement to maintain the track to an acceptable standard for access for emergency vehicles?
Thank you. Whether or not they've got the applicant's got an agreement with someone else, that's not a planning consideration. I don't know what their what the applicant's arrangements are. I would assume. Oh, did everyone hear what I just said? No, sorry. Nothing. Okay, sorry about that. like I said, okay, the applicant's arrangements with whoever has the ownership rights to that access, that is not a planning matter. It's for the applicant to agree their own rights and easements about that. And if they couldn't do that, they wouldn't be able to bring the development forward. In terms of maintaining the access for emergency use, that's not something we'd. Every access needs to be usable for the emergency services. It's not something we'd see in other developments, and I don't think it's something that we can insist on in this case.
Thank you. Councillor Flower, if we could just hear from legal at this point with regards to what can and can't be done with regards to the maintenance of that access.
Thank you, Chair. So conditions can be imposed on the site within the red line, so that irrespective of site ownership, you can impose, if you thought it appropriate, you could impose a condition on the access within the red line. That said, it would still have to meet the tests, from the normal tests for meeting planning conditions of necessity and it being relevant to planning and reasonable, and the other tests. And you've had Matthew's view on that initially, but I'm sure if you needed some further input from officers that he'd be able to give you some. Thank you, Chair.
Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Flower? Would you like to see a condition?
Because we deferred this application because of the concerns around a single access to two sites. And I don't think we can cast aside the importance of maintaining an access to a suitable standard. I don't think we can cast aside the importance of knowing that the applicant has access to because they could be refused. And I think we need that. I think that is material. We're being asked to approve something today, and I think it's material to this application, Chairman. That's my opinion, and there's a lot of opinion around here this morning, isn't there?
Thank you. Can I, just before I bring in Councillor Roper, can I ask Steve Highways for comments, please?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps just some summing up of the highway side of things. I'm not speaking on behalf of Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue. The access track that serves the site is approximately, and this will be detail that Councillor Taylor will appreciate, I'm sure, it's about 102 metres from the Cold Harbour Junction until you get to the loop, a straight section of road. Now, I didn't deal with the previous applications, but my understanding is for the adjacent BES site, which was considered acceptable with this passing width for fire access, that it was 5.5 metres wide, which is the minimum required for 2 HGVs to pass. Now, I was just checking on the Dorset and Wilts fire service as to the size of their widest appliance, and that's 2.55 metres. So on that 5.5 metre width, you've got approximately 0.3 of a metre clearance. Now, you might think that's not much, but my experience, the fire service, if they need to get somewhere, they get somewhere. So if they need to go off the track up the bank, they will do so to get through. So I feel that there's sufficient room to get in. With regards to Councillor Flower's question, it's the landowner's responsibility for maintenance, and I'd imagine that all the people who utilised that access road will be made to pay for the privilege. The adjacent BES site, we required them to actually provide a scalpinged or rolled stone surface for the access road because of the level of the development as such. This one didn't actually require it. So the second part of your question, Councillor, is the existing track suitable to take the fire service appliance? My answer would be, I would hope so, because it's satisfactory currently to take agricultural vehicles and any vehicles which are heavily laden associated with the stabling use. So, you know, we're hoping it won't happen, but if it does, I'm sure the fire service can get through. I think that's the point. I mean, I would wonder why we need 2 fire tenders to be able to pass anyway, because I imagine they're racing to the site to get in. But hopefully that's given you some surety that there should be enough space on the access track as it stands and the adjacent verges to be able to get through. And it is a private access road. The red line reaches to Cold Harbour, which is the land necessary to facilitate the development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Flower?
I'm content with that.
Thank you very much. Councillor David Cranborne.
Thank you. I'm slightly concerned about it. If the access is great now and it's fine now, that's good. This is for 40 years, this application. If in 10, 15 years' time the access becomes unusable for some reason, it's not been maintained, it's fallen apart, it's rutted, the winter's got to it. These can happen, yeah, it's not a made-up road. What happens to the BESS if it's no longer suitable for fire engines to get to it? Can we then say, you've got to turn it all off? Or what happens? We've given it permission now for 40 years, but if the conditions change, what remedies do we have to make that access viable again? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Took. If we were to condition that, would that satisfy your concern? Thank you. So we're just messaging the team now. Councillor Roper.
Thank you, Chair. Pete Roper from Portland. I have a question on the stability of the systems, the monitoring, detection and suppression systems, which actually are included in this sort of BESS environment. And I know that obviously they're sitting within a large sort of bank of batteries, but it's a question about if there was a power outage in that area, would that affect these systems, or would they, or do they already run on the this large bank of batteries at which they already sit in?
I'm not sure on any backup power for these batteries. I'm not aware.
Councillor David Norton.
Thank you. Councillor David Northam, Upwey and Broadway. We're getting into realms of speculation. The bit that I'd like to point out is that there will be a full battery safety management plan which will explore risks and probabilities of risks and mitigations against such risks. And I'm sure that that will address a number of these concerns, and that's now a condition that will happen before development commences. That's all I've got to say. I think we need to move to debate.
Thank you very much. Are we content to have closed questions? Councillor Monk? One more. No problem.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Craig, Monks, Bedminster Ward. Just one more, and hopefully a fairly short one. I know various members, including myself, raised questions, concerns around the access points and whether we could have more than one access. I know that within the further information provided by various people, and I thank all those that did provide further information, that had been considered but hadn't sort of materialised in a second access. Just for an opportunity to sort of elaborate on that, I wonder if you can kind of give us an overview and any sort of officer input on that final decision.
On the final decision to that acceptability, I think that's set out in the latest report in detail. We think we have looked at the different aspects of why and how that access couldn't be formed, and we conclude that it's not reasonable to insist that they provide that secondary access. In the report and the presentation, I talked about the neighbouring developments around the site, Stratera and the Red Line boundary, and we think that is reasonable, that there is only that one site access to it.
Councillor Monks, can I ask the officer, we heard about the non-specific labelling of access to the site. And as I understand it from the fire authority, it's actually tactical access to fight the fire. I think this is the beauty of the English language. We're getting a little bit hung up on access to the site, when actually we're referring to access for the fire service to tactically move around the location of the BES and fight the fire there. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, they're slightly different things. Planning, we need to include all land to carry out the development, and that includes the red line going up to the highway so that construction vehicles can get in and maintenance vehicles can get in. So if this development were right up on the highway, the red line wouldn't be as long. So the Fire and Rescue Service, they haven't clarified whether that access requirement relates to the kind of planning application site boundary, but it's inferred that it's about tactical firefighting options because of what they say and what they say in the NFCC guidance, and also what they've said to us in their comments as well about getting to that downwind position.
So just to reconfirm, our statutory consultee of the DWFRS have considered this site specifically. They're mindful of the single access, and they are content that fire can be contained within the site and fought tactically around the location that we have.
Yes, they haven't raised an objection to that.
Are we content to move to debate? Okay. So happy to hear anything from debate or a proposal. Councillor David Northam, Upwey and Broadway, near Weymouth.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start by mentioning that Upwey and Broadway is a neighbouring parish, and I have walked on that footpath which was referred to, so I know the area. I'm reassured that the Fire Rescue Service have looked again at the access and are content. I'm also reassured that the applicant used Green Fire Solutions Limited for part of its fire assessment. I looked up who they were, and yes, they're a reputable company, because it's easy to create a company that just ticks a box, but this is a reputable company with reputable employees. At the last meeting, I asked that Condition 8, which is the Battery Safety Management Plan, actually precede the development and was approved by Dorset Council. That's been incorporated, and that's a really important factor. It's a critical document which will fully assess the safety of the development and operation. And that document will provide, I hope, some comfort to the residents' concerns, which I think we all recognise as being concerns. But having looked and listened to the debate and knowing what we discussed last time, I see no material considerations, which means that we shouldn't approve this application. Thank you.
So, Councillor Northam, is that a proposal?
Yes, if you like. I thought we were going to debate a bit longer, but I'm happy to propose that we accept the recommendation. Thank you, with all the conditions.
Absolutely content for us to continue debate. It was just a starter for 10 with a proposal.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've listened to the debate. Again, I think we've wandered a little bit off of the beaten track, as it were. We're here to judge this application according to material planning considerations. I hear the concerns of the members. I've heard the concerns of the public as well. I personally am happy with the access, having considered all the different ins and outs of it. I was slightly concerned about the plume, but I have to accept that consultees actually are experts in their field. I'm not an expert on plumes, and I'm not an expert on fire and rescue either. But we do need to look at material planning considerations and take those reports into account. So I'm not really challenging the reports. I'm considering them, but as far as I'm concerned, I can't see any material reasons either at this stage. But I'm happy to listen to what the other members have got to say. Thank you.
Councillor David Took.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy with what I've heard and with what I've heard about the access track, and then previously on the previous meeting. the issues to do with the water and the drainage, and we've been through it all. I mentioned earlier about the maintaining, as indeed Councillor Flower, about maintaining that access track. And if we can condition that is maintained to an acceptable standard by the fire brigade, then I'd be happy to second, but I want that condition in.
Thank you very much. Belinda Rideout.
Belinda Rideout, Gillingham Ward. Councillor Tubbs just actually said everything I was just about to say, and I will go with that. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I have notes. Should we move the proposal to approve? Here I have a condition from Councillor Flower regarding maintenance, and Councillor Rideout's concern around CCTV on the access track. So if we can consider the proposal that we have in light of those two amendments, that would be great. Does anybody else wish to speak?
Yes, Chair. On that basis, I was looking at Anne Collins to see if we can get the nod to see if those proposals or conditions are acceptable and fair and reasonable, and the nod suggests that they are. So on that basis, let speak first, I think, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if members were proposing to amend the informative and introduce a condition about the maintenance of the track, such a condition could be along the lines of a pre-commencement condition about no development commencing until a scheme for the future maintenance of the track to require it, to a standard to be used by the Fire and Rescue Service, because that's the only standard really we're interested in. We can put that kind of condition on, so we could delegate authority to myself or Annalee to determine the application subject to the agreement of that wording with yourself, Chair, when we've come up with that wording after the meeting today.
So, Councillor Northam, it's your proposal. Are you content with those two conditions, the CCTV and maintenance? Thank you. And the seconder, are you content with those amendments? Or
I'm not a seconder yet, Chair, but I'm just about to be. On that basis, I'm more than happy to second the proposal.
So can we now test that at vote? So all those in favour to approve with the conditions suggested by Councillor Flower for the ongoing maintenance, which we understand now can be put in place at the beginning, and that of Councillor Rideout for the CCTV. So with a simple show of hands, those in favour? You got that? Yeah. And those against? That's easy, that's 2. Yeah, lovely, thank you. So that item is approved. Item P full 2024-0447, land north of Hewleys, Spinney, Chickrell, with conditions as cited. Thank you very much. We'll take a 5-minute adjournment in case anyone needs the facilities. Okay, members, thank you. If you can regain your seats, the meeting is going to commence now. So this is item agenda 6, P full 2024-07568, land at Midgham Farm, Hilbury Road, Aldershot. So, Alderholt. Aldershot. What a wide scope we have. I think it's this. Aldershot. So this is Alderholt. This is a slightly... Do you know, I don't think I've ever been to Aldershot. Maybe I should go to Aldershot. Councillor... Thank you very much. Councillor Took, you're wishing to speak in this meeting as ward councillor, yes? So can I just ask you just to move to that side of the chamber, just for clarity that you're going to be speaking as a ward member? Thank you. After the last meeting, Councillor Belinda Borden has left the meeting, so we just note that at this time, should she rejoin the meeting, as she's not here for the presentation, she won't be able to speak or vote. So, presenting this item, if you could introduce yourself and your team.
Morning, thank you, Chair. My name is Tony Cosgrove. I'm from the Waste and Minerals Planning Team. I'm the planning officer for this case. I'm delighted to be joined today by the manager of the team, Felicity Hart, and also Steve Strange is joining us from the transport side of things as well.
So this...
Steve Savage, he's not strange, he's savage.
Or savagely strange. So this is slightly different, just to let members know our conversation in the pre-meet. So this is a slightly different application to that which we normally have. The recommendation won't be to approve, grant or refuse, because we're acting as a consultee in this. So because of the proximity to Hampshire, they will be the deciding authority. So they will have our recommendations from this meeting. Interestingly, the recommendation is to object, and we're going to start with that so that then you can remain focused on the presentation, mindful of what the recommendation is, but then the notes that will go forward to Hampshire. Tony.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chair. So we're going to talk about an application which is mainly outside Dorset and is in Hampshire, but is of a keen interest to a lot of our residents. There's 3 parts to what I want to talk about this morning. I want to talk about the location and what the applicant CEMEX, what they want to apply for. I want to move on to some of the potential impacts of the development if it was permitted and how they interact and overlay with our Dorset Council policies. And third and finally, I want to talk a bit about our assessment of impact and the suggested response that we share with our colleagues in Hampshire County Council. So the detail is an application from CEMEX to extract sand and the normal associated works that you would link with a quarry of this size, such as haul roads, some offices and some processing area just near Alderholt. As you said, it will be determined by Hampshire County Council. We are a consultee in this. The reason for that is, although it is a cross-border site, less than 1% of the site is in Dorset. So it's an 88-hectare site, and around 0.7, 0.8 of a hectare is in Dorset. When that happens, applicants are required to submit identical planning applications to both local planning authorities, or mineral planning authorities in this case, but we do have the power to delegate the decision to one of the authorities.
I will take an intervention at this moment.
Great point of interest, Chair, that I'm Vice Chair of Northern Planning, and so is Richard Crabb, Chair. Does this affect us with interest?
No. because this application doesn't come before you.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I would concur. Yeah, it's a good point, but I think we can safely move on. Yeah. So as we were discussing now, we will be a consultee as this has been delegated to Hampshire County Council. And why has it been delegated to Hampshire County Council? By way of context, just in the interest of smooth administration, having two concurrent identical planning applications is not good for either authority. It's not good for the applicant. And I would suggest it's not good for local residents either, who have to duplicate all sorts of conversations. So that is what's been done. As Chair kindly said at the outset, just to kind of give us some context, the recommendation is that we write to our colleagues in Hampshire County Council and object. We're setting out our concerns, but that we also make it clear that we would like to work with Hampshire, the applicant CEMEX, and any other interested parties, including local residents, other stakeholders, proactively to see if there is an appropriate and sustainable solution that can be achieved. So let me set the scene. You can see there's a map on the screen there. I think we all know where Alderholt is. I've also put Fording Bridge, Ringwood, which are clearly in Hampshire. Just to give it some context, Verwood to the west there. And that purple line is the county boundary, as it wriggles its way generally north-south, but it's a pretty long boundary, pretty long border in that part of the world. And you can see it just touches ever so gently the red line of the planning application site there. I would also like to draw your attention to this road here, which I will be referring to frequently. It's got a number of names because it changes its name a couple of times as it moves up and down. I think most locals might call it the Alderholt Road, but that's certainly what I'll be calling it most of the time. You can see it is in Dorset here. The majority of it is in Hampshire on the eastern side of the border. But as we continue south, it crosses the border back into Dorset to an area known locally as Baker's Hanging, which is that junction there, which again I'll be referring to. Alderholt is by some distance the largest village in the area. I said the majority of it is in Hampshire. This map just gives you a little bit of context on that. The magenta area to the east is Hampshire, and that pink slither there on the west is the Dorset part. It's just under 0.8 of a hectare, so well under 1% of the site. So it is small in percentage terms, but it is important because it also, as I'll show you in a minute, provides the access to the site will be through that small Dorset part of the application area. By way of context, this is an area that does already have some sand and gravel extraction. CEMEX have a major site to the south, which is the site marked blue here on your screens. This is Hamer Warren, often sometimes called Bleak Hill, but I'm going to try and call it Hamer Warren. It should be restored and should be completed by around 2030. These things are often a little bit fluid, but that's the kind of the target date. And CEMEX hope that if they are granted permission by Hampshire County Council, that when extraction and operations, including restoration, when the extraction finishes at Hamer Warren, it can begin at Midgeon Farm to give them kind of continuity in their supply chain. So what does CEMEX want to do? Well, they want to extract 3.6 million tonnes of sand. The extraction will take around 13 years with 5 years of restoration at the end. To facilitate that restoration, they want to bring in around 2.9 million tonnes of inert waste. They want to do this in a series of phases, which again is kind of the norm for these kind of applications. You kind of phase your extraction and phase your restoration, so you're not doing everything at one time. They're going to do that in 3 different phases, which I'll show you a little bit more detail on in a minute. And as I said at the outset, there is also the usual supporting infrastructure like offices, haul roads, weighbridge, lagoons, some in-site conveyor belts as well, which is the norm for applications like this, and I will show briefly in a bit. So this is what the phasing is going to look like. The first phase, which is going to run for about 3 years, is extraction only. There will then be a period of extraction and importation, which will run for 10 years. And then the third phase will be about 5 years long, which will be importation only, so bringing in the inert material with which to restore the site. So that kind of gives you a feel for some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in a minute, because a lot of this drives HG movements and transport challenges and opportunities that are there. So this is a map of the site. Let me just point out a few relevant features. So you've got the classic red line going around the outside. You can see here in the northwest, we have got the kind of the southeastern part of Alderholt village, relatively close to the red line here. You will see there is a triangle which offers a bit of a buffer between the village and the operations. There's a scale bar at the south here, which I hope you can see. Each of these black areas is 100 meters long, just by way of context. We then have these solid green lines, which are buns, which are going around the site to help provide some attenuation of noise and reduce any visual impacts that there might well be. The red star here is in the Dorset slither, which provides access to the site. So that's where the access will be coming in. And you can also see some what we call cells, which is how the operation will be phased with concurrent restoration and extraction happening. Through the centre of the site, we have got an area known as Lomer Lane, which provides north-south access, which is a relatively lightly used part of the road network, but I can talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. There are a series of phases, so the idea is that this area is extracted first. There will then be a conveyor belt built underneath Lomer Lane here, which will be used to transport material when extraction is happening on this eastern area over to the processing area here. There will also be a new junction. Lomer Lane traffic will continue to have priority, but that will facilitate the movement of plant across Lomer Lane back onto this original area here. And then when this is all complete, the restoration will then occur and the site will close down. So that's the location, and that's what CEMEX are applying for. So the second phase I'd like to move on to is talk about some of the potential implications, some of the potential impacts, and how they interact with our policies here at Dorset. One of the largest talking point, I think it's fair to say, is transport. For us, all mineral will be taken off-site via HGVs. The plan is that 99% of it, when it leaves the site, will turn left and travel down the Alderholt Road to Baker's Hanging and then out onto the wider road network along this route here. Why do I say that's 99%? Because Hamer Warren, the existing site to the south, that is what's currently happened, and it is conditionable that we will require transport not to go through Alderholt and Fording Bridge, and Hampshire are on side with that as well, so transport will be going south. 99% because there will still be some local deliveries. People in Alderholt and the surrounding area will want to buy sand and gravel, and those deliveries will be done like that. But the current numbers from Hamer Warren are less than 1% of deliveries go north, as it were, towards Alderholt, and they are all local deliveries. Baker's Hanging is a national speed limit, and we've got some transport colleagues here, and they can talk about that. CEMEX have done a transport assessment in which they say they accept that some parts of the road offer challenges, but they say that HGVs can always pass what they describe as slowly. However, I will say they don't define what slowly means. And there are other parts of the road where HGVs can pass with no challenges at all. So how are we looking at the minute? What's the current situation? We currently have around 2,500 vehicle movements per weekday along the road. The busiest hour is the morning rush hour between 8 and 9, where we have 220 vehicle movements. And we currently have 80 HGV movements from Hamer Warren. We have other HG movements as well, because the road is used by part of the road network, so other HGVs use it. But 80 of those HGV are from Hamer Warren. There's hardly any HGV movement, if any at all, around the weekend from the quarry. So I said earlier about the phases when I showed that Venn diagram. So phase 1, mineral coming off-site only. Phase 2 will be mineral and import going both ways. And then phase 3 will be when we are bringing inert weight in for the restoration. Let's have a look at some of the numbers that are associated with that. So during phase 1, it's quite likely that Hamer Warren, or Bleak Hill as it's sometimes called, will still be restoring, and they will be having around 36 HGV movements a day. So I'll just say that again. Hamer Warren, phase 1, it's quite possible they will still be restoring, so they'll have around 36 a day. Midgham Farm will be, if it's permitted, will be extraction only, so that will be 90 movements a day, giving around 126. As we move on, Bleak Hill stroke Hamer Warren will conclude. There'll be no more restoration or extraction, so we will just be looking at Midgham Farm. We'll be moving into phase 2 of Midgham Farm, which you'll remember was both restoration, bringing material in, and extraction. So that gives us around 132 HGV movements a day. And then as we go to phase 3, which is simply the restoration and the movement of infill into Midgham Farm, that gives us 90 HGV movements a day. So that gives us an indication of the volume of traffic that will be moving along this road. Of course, transport is more than just vehicular access. People move around in other ways. The footpath network is important in this part of the world. These are all, the vast majority of these are actually Hampshire footpaths, but they are used by our Dorset residents, so it's very relevant to our conversation here. The plan is to divert 3 footpaths, which I'll show you in a second, and to facilitate the development, and then to create a new permissive path in the southwest. In the application that CEMEX put together, they say that that permissive path would be in place for at least the duration of the operations. So there may be a conversation about keeping it for the long term. There may not, but that's something we can perhaps look at. So let's have a look at where we are. So if I start in the north, hopefully you can see this purple line here is an existing east-west trending footpath, which you can see has its roots in Alderholt Village, so it's a part of the network. The plan would be to push this footpath north and then bring it like that to extend, so basically to extend the length of the footpath that covers a wider area. Similarly down here, this purple footpath here, which is in the east of the proposed site, would be pushed outwards to the edge of this field boundary here. And then coming down to the south, this site, this footpath, which currently extends north, east-west, would be pushed outwards away from the centre to give us this longer footpath here to provide access around. This is the new permissive path, which would be in the southwest, which would in effect go between the road and the new bund, which I showed you earlier, the green one, and would link Alderholt to a, I think it's fair to say, local residents would fair to say that it's a locally important area of woodland which is used for people walking dogs and recreating here in the southwest. So as I say, the plan for the footpaths would essentially be to move the current footpath network out and create a larger circumference around the site. There are, moving on away from transport, some environmental health concerns, such as noise and dust. Perhaps one of the most important of those is that the traffic needs to stay out of Alderholt, which we think we can ensure that happens. And there are other concerns as well, which around the noise levels and the dust. We're confident we can have conditions with the applicant and Hampshire as the decision maker around the right conditions to ensure that happens if they get the right baseline. So they're a conversation to be had. So we know where we are, we know what CEMEX want to do, and I've had a look there at some of the potential impacts as they hit our Dorset residents. So what I'd like to do now is to move on and have a look at some of the policies that we have in Dorset which could guide any response that we have. So the first one is policy AS1, where we have a duty in Dorset to ensure there is an adequate and steady supply of mineral. So I think it's only fair for us to recognise that we know that other authorities have got to do the same thing, and we have to support them in that, and that includes providing high quality consultation and an ongoing engagement with Hampshire County Council and other stakeholders. So our commitment is to help them with that. Another one of our policies which is relevant here is the presumption in favour of sustainable development. So we have a responsibility to engage positively with the process, to take a positive approach, and to work proactively to find solutions if there are any available. The third policy I'd like to draw our attention to is policy DM1, which reminds us that adverse impacts should be avoided or is mitigated as far as is possible. We need to address any issues that arise, and these include challenges or opportunities around amenity, biodiversity and restoration, even if they are outside the site boundary. And that's something that's going to be quite important when we talk about the transport, because many of the potential impacts of this development are outside the current site boundary. Policy DM2 reminds us to look at the whole life cycle. It reminds us to look at noise, dust and traffic on and off site, and reminds us that all impacts need to be fully assessed and addressed, and that fully assessed is important as well as part of that conversation. So the penultimate policy I'd like to just draw our attention to is DM8, which is around transport and minerals development. Reminds us that we need to provide a safe access and that we need to avoid any unacceptable impacts on the road network and that we need to look at sustainable transport options. And it's interesting, in the policy, it explicitly mentions a number of sustainable transport options. I won't list them all, but one of them includes conveyor belts, and that will be relevant in our conversation shortly as well. And then the final policy I'd like to just draw our attention to is DM10, which reminds us about we can use planning obligations. We have a series of tests for Section 106, as they're probably known, but they may help us with some sort of support around community resources or transport infrastructure if that was required to make an application acceptable. So let me move on to the assessment of how we feel about all this at the officer level. We think the current transport assessment is helpful, but it is not broad enough. And there are a number of issues with it. It is silent, I think it's fair to say, on the impacts on the Bakers Hanging Junction. Now that's particularly important because pretty much all the traffic, 99% of the traffic, HGV traffic in this application, is going to go through Bakers Hanging, whether it's coming north towards the site or whether it's going south away from the site. People who know that part of the world will know Bakers Hanging is an unusual junction. It's particularly tight when you approach it from the west coming from Verwood. And when you approach it from the east coming from Ringwood, it goes up a hill. It's not a particularly steep hill, but it is a long, slow drag. And if you're going to put a lot of HGVs through that junction, I think it's fair to say we would like to better understand what's going on there. Moving to the Alderholt Road, the report, as I said, that CEMEX put together said that 2 HGVs can pass slowly. There are areas where it is tight, where it is very tight. I've got colleagues from Transport here, so I won't steal their thunder. But I will say that the recent inspector's report from Alderholt, which many colleagues will remember from the proposed development at Alderholt, specifically mentions the width of the road and the need to ensure that HGVs can pass safely, which is something we're very mindful of. We think the transport assessment should also spend more time considering the cumulative impacts of other developments. And I would suggest relevant to that would be new developments in Alderholt and potential developments including Purple Haze, which is between Bakers Hanging and Verwood, is in Dorset, but has the potential to create HGV traffic there as well. There are an array of, and I've put in brackets modest, which is my phrase, not Transport colleagues' phrase. And by modest, I mean issues which need probably to be discussed at an officer level, which I'm pretty confident we can work through. So I think these can be sorted out, but there is quite a number of them. But I think, again, working in cooperation with our colleagues in Hampshire and local stakeholders, we can work through them. And then the final point I say is the CEMEX report does mention the possibility of a conveyor belt moving material from the south of Midgeon Farm to the extant processing area at Hamer Warren. And it spends about a paragraph exploring that, and it concludes that it would not be possible. We think that needs a longer assessment, because that would be quite a sustainable way, if the application was permitted, to move lorries well away from Alderholt, keep it well south. The access to Hamer Warren is a good distance south from Alderholt, and we think that could be a really interesting conversation to be had, and we don't think the transport assessment assesses that sufficiently. If permitted, as I've said, the diversion of the 3 footpaths is required. We think it would be great to spend some more time examining if the permissive route could be retained after any operations are completed, if they were permitted to go ahead. There are, as I say, environmental health concerns, but we're confident that some good conditions and some good liaison can address these. We know that Hampshire have got feedback from New Forest District Council and from their own colleagues as well, so there's a shared voice around that. And if the development is permitted, we think we should examine if a Section 106 is needed to mitigate any residual harm which is still there, and that may include a community fund to support local projects, and that would be funded by CEMEX and run for the duration of the Midgeon Farm operations. Again, we think that would be something interesting to explore. So I'd like to bring us back full circle and finish off where I started and say that the recommendation that we'd like to bring here this morning, or this afternoon as it is now, is to say that we should write to Hampshire County Council objecting to development, setting out our concerns, but sending a signal to them that we want to work with them to see if there is a sustainable solution and what that looks like.
Thank you very much, Tony. So we now move to our speakers. And initially, we've got Venetia Rowland. You have 3 minutes. I'll give you a heads up at 2.5.
Some of the issues on this application are public rights of way, air quality and health, amenity of local residents, protected habitats and species, noise and dust, loss of agricultural land, groundwater, flood risk, and traffic cumulative impacts. CEMEX does not adequately address the issues to make it a viable and deliverable site without significant impacts to the environment, landscape, and residents. I live at Primrose Cottage, which borders 640 metres of the proposed site on the eastern side, and had an environmental noise assessment undertaken by Sustainable Acoustics through February-March in 2023. The survey concluded that the soundscape of Primrose Cottage was of rural character, 27 dB LA90, and it went on, this record can serve as a potential preventative measure against the possibility of adverse noise impact from a future mineral extraction plant operating in a neighbouring property, which would have significant adverse effects on the health and quality of life of the residents in the area. In the CEMEX WBM report, there are significant errors and it does not comply with the NPPF or BS 5228. The site is also close to the River Avon SSSI complex, which is of national importance and stands to be affected in the same way as the international nature conservation sites of the Avon. Insufficient attention has been paid to the potential environmental impact of the many springs, streams and watercourses that feed into the River Avon and the surrounding land and wood areas. We would experience noise from the site 5.5 days a week. There is no respite for us. A mitigation for operation would be restricting working hours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for 5 days a week. As I am a member of the Mineral Liaison Panel for Hammer Warren, it should also be noted that Hammer Warren, has not operated by CEMEX, has not been working on a Saturday for the last 2 years. I believe both Harbridge Drove Hilbury Road is classified as a Type 4 construction road, and as such, HGVs are not supported on this type of road. On the Alderholt Meadows appeal, the width of the road, the amount of traffic and the speeds were a significant factor. CEMEX have not proposed any real mitigation in this application. Even now, the road is regularly closed due to accidents or maintenance issues. CEMEX have only contributed £1,000 per year for highway maintenance. I find this woeful. In the last 35 years, the operations that have been in place at Hammer Warren, only a total of £2,000 has been provided for the community activities in Harbridge, nothing in Alderholt. This demonstrates their lack of community engagement and support. Midgeon Farm, in reality, would not be completed in 18 years, as we've seen from Hammer Warren, being 39. This site condemns residents to a life sentence in their properties and a catastrophic impact on the environment.
Thank you very much, Venetia, for your representation. Thank you. We now move to the Parish Council. This is Councillor Gina Logan from Alderholt Parish Council. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of Alderholt Parish Council, we object to this proposal and have made a full response to Hampshire County Council to this effect. We concur with the comments made by Dorset Council in its report regarding the transport issues, in particular the unsuitability of the narrow Harbridge Drove Alderholt Road, where it is often very difficult for 2 HGVs to pass. One pulls in onto the verge, waiting for the other one to approach. The continuing and increased HGV movements will have an adverse impact on this route and Baker's Hanging Junction. Para 7.20 highlights the need for a sustainable approach to transport in an attempt to minimise distances travelled by road. To this effect, the use of a conveyor linking the southern end of the proposed Midgham Farm site to the existing CMEX Bleak Hill 3 site is suggested. However, the comments made at 7.22 asking that the pros and cons of such a system are investigated and shared are not mentioned in the proposed response letter at Annex 1. This particular oversight needs to be addressed before the letter is agreed and issued. We believe the letter also needs to be strengthened by including concerns regarding the hydrology issues within the area that will be impacted by not only the mineral extraction but also the proposed inert waste infill. The planning statement, volume 1, lists the numerous streams, brooks and drainage ditches, which shows the complexity of the hydrology of the area in and around the site. Submitted documentation states the average groundwater levels are 3 to 6 metres below ground surface, with a seasonal winter variation of 1 to 3 metres higher. Thus, with a variation of 3 metres, the ground is wet, the groundwater level becomes the surface, hence the regular winter flooding. We strongly question that the hydrological impact assessment hasn't covered a large enough area encompassing the residences in Alderholt. We are very concerned that the removal of the deposits, i.e. the aquifers, sand and gravel, will impact the existing hydrology, and the subsequent infilling will then have a further impact, possibly on the bedrock clays surrounding and under the site, resulting in possible shrinkage and or waterlogging and flooding over much of a larger area. This must be addressed. With reference to environmental health issues raised in paras 5.27 to 5.29, we don't appear to be included in the response letter. They need to be. During much of the operation, simultaneous extraction and infilling will be taking place. The increase in noise levels will be significant, far greater than those conditioned at Bleak Hill. The hydrology of the area will necessitate dewatering during all but one phase of the operation, with the water being pumped to a freshwater pond. The effects of this operation below the water table will require the continual use of water pumps.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. That's 3 minutes. We now move to the local ward councillor, Councillor David Tuck. David, you know the score, 3 minutes, and I'll give you a heads up at 2.5.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to say thank you to the officer for producing a very comprehensive report. It explains the issues, problems that this creates, and it did so very logically. So thank you very much for that. This application, I notice they haven't bothered to come and support it themselves from CEMEX. However, the application, I think, is a bit of a preemptive strike. The current Hampshire County Council Minerals and Waste Plan does not include this site, and there have been numerous objections to its inclusion in the proposed new Minerals and Waste Plan from local MPs, local parish and town councils. Dorset Council itself, in fact, objected to it being included. The total demand, I heard comments earlier about it's minerals, it's important, it needs to be done. The total demand for sand and gravel from now until 2040 in the area is projected to be 9.67 million tonnes. Call for sites for the updated mineral plan had a potential yield of 16.8 million tonnes, so nearly double. And the mass of the SSG proposal to be extracted from Midgham Farm is 3.6 million. So it's clear that the resource at Midgham Farm are well surplus to any requirements that Hampshire has. And it just strikes me that the application is to get it in before the Minerals and Waste Plan removes it from the site allocations. Increased traffic and road safety concerns, we've heard a lot about those. We talk about Alderholt Road, and you've heard, I call it the Summerley Road. Everyone in the village calls it the Summerley Road because it goes past the Summerley estate. It's narrow. In places, it's a little more than 5 metres wide. A lot of it is 5.5 or less. Nowhere is it over 6 as far as I'm aware. And if the officers wants to correct me on that, then please do. But the design manual for roads and bridges says a minimum carriage road width, typically 5.5 metres, to allow safe passage of HGVs. Manual for streets 2, provide guidance on rural roads, and they suggest that these roads should be designed to minimise conflicts. There's nowhere on this road that an HGV and a horse or a bicycle could legally pass according to the Highway Code, because the HGV could not leave the required 2.5 metres for a horse. And there are horses, there's stables in Alderholts, there's stables all over the place. So this application, I think, falls on a number of fronts: the officer's report and the sheer incapacity of the roads with deep ruts on either side, which have been...
Thank you very much, David. That's just over 3 minutes. Would you like Tony to respond to any of those points from any of those speakers?
Yes, thank you. Perhaps if I break them down into noise, hydrology, transport, and allow transport colleagues to come in on the third one through you. So I think the points that have been made are, they are fair and they are relevant. And what I would just say is I'd remind us that the conversation is around our response back to Hampshire County Council as a consultee. So I know hydrology is being discussed between Hampshire County Council, CEMEX, and the Environment Agency. So those concerns are live and they are real and they're going to go through the process. Similarly, concerns around noise. It's interesting, one of the themes this morning is kind of the use of expert knowledge. There are different bits of expertise and different emphases come from different areas. And I know Hampshire County Council are working through the noise as well. So we can be confident that these conversations are being had with the right people at the right level in Hampshire, determining this as the decision-making body. So I absolutely hear what people are saying, and they should be confident that we hear them and that they are going to be taken forward. The third point was the transport. So if I give away.
Through you, Chair. Basically, all the points we've heard regarding transport are wholly valid. As a highway authority, we have reservations regarding the increase in traffic. Now, it's not a massive increase in HGV traffic. I think it's in the region of 6.5% in the AM and 6.4% in the PMP, but it is an increase. As Councillor Took quite rightly mentioned, the width of the approach road, however it is named, varies. It varies from perhaps 5 metres to, as you say, no greater than 6. So we have concerns as to whether HGVs are able to pass. We're aware that they do currently pass, but it probably leads to them overspilling onto the adjacent highway verge and degrading that. Now, the road isn't ours, it's Hampshire's, but we're duty-bound to notify them that there's a potential issue there. As to the actual width that's required, 5.5 metres is our bare minimum for 2 HGVs. You heard me quote on the last application. DMRB applies to trunk road network. This isn't a trunk road, but there could be appropriate widths above that 5.5, determined by the actual alignment of the carriageway. Is it on a bend, for example? Do we need it wider for those? So we need that information provided so we have a surety, and the residents of Alderholt have a surety, that it's safe, that we can have HGVs driving up and down there safely. The other final point is Baker's Hanging itself. As Tony alluded to, it has its issues with regards to its alignment. It is a collision hotspot. We've had a number of accidents over the last 5 years. I think there are 8. Now, they're not all directly related to the use of the junction itself, but then the immediate proximity. So we do need to take those on board. So we're asking the applicants to model that junction, see how it works. How does it take on board the cumulative impact of other developments, Purple Haze, for example, to the north? Can it work? And if it doesn't, what needs to be done to make it work? Paid for by the applicant, of course. So we're all well aware, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet here. We have reservations, but if they can prove that it could work and that the appropriate mitigation can be employed, then we can be supportive of it. I just think the final point, as Tony mentioned, was right turn movements out of the site, 1% currently. We're not anticipating that they're going to increase above that. There will be a need for local deliveries, but we wholeheartedly want all the traffic going south with appropriate signing at the exit from the site to ensure there's a route that takes it down onto the A31 and then National Highways can make their comments as to how they feel that junction works as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we now move into a period of technical questions. I've got Councillor David Taylor would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor David Taylor, Chelmsford Merry Ward.
Are you going to? You do. Yeah, absolutely, David. So you can choose to come back in at the close of the meeting, or you can go home. Excellent. Thank you, David, for your representation.
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Taylor, Chelmsford Merry Ward, member of the panel. The questions have been raised basically because it's environmental, health and safety, all those sort of things are coming in. The water one is the one I'm really going to pick up on because I'm very concerned about this, especially with natural streams, the river, and the ecology of it all, really, because the fact is the thing. And secondly, I'd like to say, there's something you mentioned about the trees and hedgerows and things like that all around the area. Are they being safeguarded? I can't see anything in the reports. So therefore, there's going to be a bit more in-depth due so that we can really understand what's going on here, as we've had with other sites we've been offered. My personal concern is environmental issues. I feel there is a very strong problem here with the case of environmental health coming our way. And I don't see anything within the report to say what they're going to do about it. And also the water table. Nothing about that, apart from 3 metres mentioned by a colleague over there. The fact is that it will be affected quite drastically, and it means that when they're digging out and it will fill up from wherever, there doesn't seem to be any control. And that's what I want to really find out about here is what's the control, what's the future looking like, and where are they going? Because I haven't got a clue on this. It's just a question of stabbing in the dark. Thank you, Chair.
So if I can just ask the officer, because I think some of those points were addressed in your response. As I understand it, the hydrology is a live conversation within Hampshire at the moment, and as the deciding authority, they will be responsible for that. And I'm presuming any biodiversity and planting schemes and all of that will also be resolved by them. But if that's wrong, if you could confirm that, thank you.
No, that's absolutely correct. And other issues as well, such as, say, archaeology. There's potential for archaeology in sight. That's a really live conversation. I've seen comments from the Hampshire County Council archaeologist requiring certain activities take place beforehand. And once they have those conclusions, they can then come to a view. And I think it's similar with the hydrology. Once they better understand the implications and the possible consequence of this, they can then come to a view.
Thank you. Yes, Hampshire might be aware of it, but Dorset might need to be looking at it as well, because it does actually affect in both borders. And I feel as though this should be a combination of how does it affect Dorset as well? And I think it will. Okay, thank you, Chair.
I couldn't agree more, which is, if I refer you back to how we started and finished the presentation, it was like, we object. But then the second line was, we want to take away a commitment to work with our colleagues in Winchester. So we don't just simply send in an objection and then metaphorically stick our fingers in our ears. We say, we object, but we want to work with you to find a positive solution if there is one. And if there isn't, we want to flesh that out as well and bring to the surface.
Any other questions? Yes, Belinda Rideout.
Belinda Rideout, Gillingham Ward, just a quick question, Tony. As part of the Dorset Council response, so you're going to explore need for 106 to deliver and fund highway works to mitigate against the operation and compensate. Will that include ongoing maintenance funding of the roads, the Dorset roads that it affects, please, over the length of the whole?
Through you, Chair. Well, as explained, the majority of the road is through Hampshire. So we would hope that they would be negotiating a more appropriate maintenance fee than the £1,000 we heard of before. I think it's fair to say that if they're negotiating for a settlement or an amount to be paid, then we should have a proportionate amount for the roads through Dorset. Now, whether we could extend that all the way from Baker's Hanging down to the A31 junction may be up for debate, and justification is paramount here. So a 6.5% increase in HGV movements may limit our justification. But if there's a discussion to be had with Hampshire about maintenance, we should be part of it. Thank you.
Are you content with that response?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor.
Can I just come in just on a point of clarification? Steve mentioned 6.5%. That's 6.5% of traffic. The percentage increase of HGVs is significantly higher because we're going from around 80 a day to around 130 a day. But when you look at the vehicle movements as a whole, which I think is what Steve was probably referring to, it would be a 6.5% increase of all vehicle movements, but the HGV movements would be considerably higher than that.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Northam, Upwey and Broadway.
Thank you, Chair. A few things reading through the letter and listening to your presentation. In your letter, you talk about the road being 6 kilometres wide. It's just a typo. Okay. You talked in your presentation about how the conveyor might alleviate the traffic demand. I only scan read the letter. Could you check that it's in the letter, that element of the conveyor, or give me assurance that it's in the letter? And the last bit I didn't understand was, yes, there's concern about the road, I can see that, but doesn't the Hamer Warren quarry already use that road, or has it got a different access? Thank you.
Yeah, just focusing on the final point there, absolutely. Yeah, and that quarry has been open for a long time, and those roads have been used by that traffic for a long time. And they go up and down every day, and they have done for very many years. That has been the case. I think what we're looking at here is a significant percentage increase from where we are now, because Hamer Warren, the activity in and around Hamer Warren is relatively low at the minute. It used to be much busier than it is now. So we're looking at around 80 vehicles a day at the minute. And the peak for Midgham Farm alone would be about 132. So there would be an increase on that, but it probably is taking us back to what Hamer Warren was like some years ago when it was busier. But you're absolutely right. These are the roads that have been used by these types of HGVs for some time, and in and out of Baker's Hanging for some time as well.
David?
Yes, we can. Yeah, we absolutely can. Yeah, there's no problem with that at all. Yeah, we have had informal conversations with both CEMEX and Hampshire County Council around the importance of that. So when that's in writing, that won't be a surprise at all. Yes.
Thank you very much. Are there any more technical questions? No? Okay, so we can move to debate. Councillor Flower.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Spencer Flower, Verwood Ward. I'm very familiar with this area because of the potential of purple haze. I went to the EIP in Winchester a few weeks ago, and I'm interested. It's a good report, but I'm slightly concerned that the reasons we gave as a council for it not to be included in their waste and minerals and waste plan, I want to be reassured that those reasons are reflected in the letter. Because you can't say one thing 1 minute because it's not in and you don't want it in, and the next minute write a letter concerned about a planning application. The two do have a relationship because at the moment their plan doesn't have it in, and I think David Tuke was absolutely right to draw attention to that. So I'm particularly concerned about that we get a consistency. The other thing I'm concerned about is Baker's Hanging, and you rightly point out there's been a crash history there for many, many years. I use that road, and I don't like coming out of there. You do it's a bit of a timing matter of whether you can get out in time before the next vehicle arrives at that junction. So taking a significant increase in HGV traffic, in my view, would not be achievable without significant impact on that. And it's well recorded. It sits in our we've recognised this for many years in the old county council, that at some point, were there to be any significant mineral changes, extractions in that area, that this will become a planning game matter where we'd get the junction properly changed. And you're talking about quite a significant amount of money and quite a significant alteration to that to make it a viable junction. So I hope we emphasise that. But the other thing was going to mention, we talk about the narrowness of, I call it the Older Holt Road, but I know it's the same one. and the fact that you get two HGVs that can just about get past each other. In the recent past, government have issued guidelines about the minimum distances traffic has to be away from cyclists. How on earth are we going to achieve that if we've got such a narrow carriageway with two HGVs going to just get past each other? How does that impact on those that cycle? I mean, I support the recommendation to object to this, but I want to be reassured about the consistency for why we felt that it shouldn't be included in their minerals and waste plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flower. So there are four concerns that I noted there. One that Councillor Took also mentioned with regards to changes in priority on the road with regards to pedestrians, horses and cyclists. And we spoke at length in the pre-meet with regards to the width of the road. So are you satisfied that we can address those concerns in our letter to Hampshire?
I am, but I think it's also important to make a second commitment, which is, at the Councillor's suggestion, to go through the correspondence for the original objection and just cross-reference that and ensure that those are put up in lights so they are highly visible.
Councillor Flower, does that satisfy your question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Northam, Upwey and Broadway.
I wasn't privy to that question, that answer for the comments on the Hampshire waste plan, because that's history from my point of view. So I'm going to find it difficult to vote in favour of that amendment that was suggested. Thank you.
Okay, so just to be clear, this isn't an amendment, it's an addition to the letter that goes, okay. Councillor Flower.
I'm aware from going to the examination in public that we objected to the site being included in the plan. I think there's significant clarity around that objection for the councillor to not be confused by not having it in front of him this morning.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak or propose? Councillor Flower.
I'm happy to propose, subject to the inclusion of that additional data, so we got that consistency, but I do...
Thank you very much. And Councillor David Taylor. Thank you very much. So we have a proposal and a second to object with the wording that we had from our first screen, which was to engage in a positive way with Hampshire Council and subsequent to the conversation that we've had here to incorporate those original concerns and the additional points that have come into our letter. So with a simple show of hands, all those in favour of objecting, that is. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. And I think that's everyone. So that item, we are resolved to send our objection as a Dorset Council to P full 2024-07568, land at Midgham Farm, Hilbury Road, Alderholt. So can I thank the officers, Tony Cosgrove, Highways and Felicity Hart for what I thought was a very comprehensive. It is a complex matter. Minerals are not simple. And I thought that actually this was a very complex presentation made very simple. And so thank you very much for that. Can I ask Democratic Services if there are any urgent items? No? And do we have any exempt business? No? So I declare the meeting closed at 12:35 and I thank everyone for their participation. Thank you.